The crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting golden light across marble floors, where Russell's mop left wet streaks nobody noticed. He was invisible, had been for 3 years now, ever since trading his therapist's office for a janitor's cart. But she saw him. The little girl standing alone in the corner, hands fluttering in patterns only she understood, while executives in $1,000 suits turned away, conversations dropping to whispers. Russell recognized those movements instantly, the same ones his son Caleb made when the world became too loud. Then she did something that stopped every heart in that ballroom. She walked straight through the crowd of people who'd spent an hour pretending she didn't exist, stopped 3 feet from a man in a maintenance uniform, and spoke her first words in front of them all. "Dance with me." The silence that followed wasn't just surprise, it was the sound of 2 worlds colliding, and one of them was about to shatter. 3 hours earlier, Russell had knelt on the worn linoleum of his studio apartment, watching Caleb arrange dinosaur figurines in their morning ritual. 8 years old, and his son could name every species from the Triassic period, but struggled with eye contact. The boy's hands moved with careful precision, organizing plastic stegosaurus, triceratops, brachiosaurus into lines that made sense only to him. This was how Caleb processed a world that came too fast, too chaotic, too overwhelming. Russell poured coffee into a chipped mug, his hands bearing 3 years of calluses from mops and trash bins. These weren't the hands that once wrote treatment plans and held therapy sessions. These were the hands that had failed to answer his wife's call the day she died, rushing home because Caleb was melting down at school and Russell was stuck with a patient he couldn't leave. Teresa. Her name still felt like touching exposed wire. The semi-truck had run a red light. Police said instantaneous. Russell knew better. He'd been dying slowly ever since, one missed moment at a time. He'd quit his practice 6 weeks after the funeral. Couldn't sit in that office where he'd chosen a 50-minute session over his family. So he'd traded his doctorate for a custodian's uniform, found work that let him be home when Caleb needed him, work that didn't require him to pretend he had answers. "Stegosaurus first," Caleb said, not looking up. "Because of the plates." "Because of the plates," Russell echoed. The familiar rhythm grounded them both. By evening, Russell was at the Whitmore Building's charity gala, pushing his cart through corridors, while 200 guests in silk and diamonds celebrated whatever cause justified the champagne. He kept to the margins, perfecting the art of being invisible. People looked through janitors the same way they looked through glass. That's when he saw her. The little girl in the midnight blue dress, standing alone near the coat check. Her hands moved in small circles at her sides, self-soothing gestures Russell recognized from every morning with Caleb. She was maybe 10, and every person in that ballroom moved around her like she didn't exist. Executives whispered. Guests turned away. The little girl became more agitated. Hands fluttering faster, breathing shallow. Russell watched for 15 minutes, waiting for someone, anyone, to help. No one came. Russell moved before he'd decided to move. He approached from the side, crouched 5 feet away so he wouldn't startle her. "The lights are really bright, aren't they?" he said quietly. "And the music's got too many notes happening at once." The girl's eyes snapped to his face, direct, intense eye contact. "Listening." "I know a trick," Russell continued, voice steady. "You pick one sound, just one. Maybe the cello. You focus on just that sound and let the others blur. It's like those magic eye pictures. You're not trying to see everything, just one thing." The girl's breathing slowed. Her hand moved to her pocket, pulled out a small plastic stegosaurus. She held it up to him. Russell felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, dinosaurs are good too. They lived when the world was quieter." She almost smiled. "Step away from my daughter." The voice behind him could have frozen steel. Russell stood, turned, found himself facing a woman who radiated controlled fury. Tall, sharp-featured black dress that cost more than his monthly rent. Her eyes, gray, cold, flicked between him and the girl. Around them, conversations died. Now, Russell raised his hands, stepped back. She was having trouble. I didn't ask for your explanation. The woman moved between them like a physical barrier. Her hands didn't touch her daughter, stayed clenched at her sides. Heather, we talked about this. You stay close at these events. You know the rules. Adrian, is everything all right? A silver-haired man in an expensive suit materialized, eyeing Russell like he was something found on the bottom of a shoe. Should we call security? That won't be necessary, Mr. Pemberton. Adrian's jaw tightened. She glanced at Russell's uniform, at his name tag. This is just a misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding carried weight. Russell was the help. He'd overstepped. He'd crossed invisible boundaries that separated their worlds in public, where witnesses could see. My apologies, Russell said, because what else could he say? He looked past Adrienne to Heather, who clutched the dinosaur against her chest, watching him with those too aware eyes. I hope you enjoy your evening. He turned toward his cart, 3 steps away when he heard it, small, quiet, unmistakable. Thank you. Russell stopped. Heather was looking at him, half hidden behind her mother's dress, lips definitely moving. 2 words. Adrian had heard too. Something complicated happened behind her eyes. Shock. Shame. Something else Russell couldn't read. He nodded once to Heather, then grabbed his cart and disappeared into the service corridor before security could be called anyway. For 2 hours, Russell kept his head down, emptied trash, wiped surfaces, stayed in margins where people like him belonged. But he couldn't stop thinking about that little girl, about how everyone in that room full of supposed philanthropists had looked straight through her, about the expression on her mother's face, protective and terrified in equal measure. Near midnight, hauling trash to the service elevator, Russell passed a half-open office door. Voices inside. He recognized one, Adrian's, sharp with stress. I don't care what the board thinks, Gerald. She's my daughter. I'm not hiding her like some dirty secret. No one's suggesting that. The man's voice was practiced, smooth. We're simply saying these high-profile events aren't ideal for a child with challenges. It reflects poorly when what? When people see my daughter exists? When they're forced to acknowledge difference? Adrienne, you've built this company from nothing. But leadership means difficult choices. Understanding optics. That scene with the maintenance man? He was helping her, more than any of us, apparently. Russell should walk away. He gripped the trash bag tighter, started to move. I used to be a special education teacher, Gerald. Before I married Preston, before this empire. I spent my days with kids like Heather. I was good at it. I loved it. Then I gave it all up because my husband said it wasn't appropriate for his wife to work with those children. Now look at me, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I can't even help my own daughter at a party. Too worried about optics, about the goddamn image. Her voice cracked. Russell recognized that sound. He'd made it himself, alone at 3 a.m. when Caleb finally slept, and he could stop being strong. Russell moved quickly to the elevator, pressed the button. Inside, descending, he couldn't shake Adrienne's face. That moment when Heather said thank you, and everything in the woman's armor started cracking. At home, Caleb slept on Mrs. Patterson's couch, dinosaurs arranged on the coffee table in perfect order. Russell paid the sitter, carried his son to the car, drove through empty streets. In the apartment, he tucked Caleb into bed, adjusted the night light, not too bright, never too bright, and stood watching his son sleep. Caleb's hands twitched in dreams, still arranging, still organizing chaos. Russell thought about Heather, about that stegosaurus in her pocket, about being the first person to see her as human instead of problem. He thought about Adrienne's voice cracking, about the teacher she used to be before life convinced her to be someone else. On the refrigerator, held by a T-Rex magnet, was the last photo of his intact family. Russell, Teresa, 3-year-old Caleb at the zoo. Teresa laughing, head thrown back. Caleb focused on something off camera. Russell looking at them both with an expression he barely recognized. Contentment. The certainty that this was enough was everything. He touched the photo briefly, then went to bed. 2 weeks later, Russell was deep cleaning the executive level when he heard a small, distressed sound. He followed it to a corner office. Door ajar. Inside, Heather sat on the floor behind a massive desk, rocking slightly, hands pressed over her ears. Office lights blazed fluorescent. Television mounted on the wall blared news at high volume. The sensory assault was overwhelming. Russell didn't hesitate. Hit the light switch, dimmed it to 30%, grabbed the remote, killed the television. The sudden quiet settled like snow. Heather's rocking slowed. Her hands came down, hovering uncertain. "It's okay," Russell said quietly from the doorway, not approaching. "It's quieter now. You're safe." She looked at him. Recognition flickered. The maintenance man from the gala who'd understood about the music, the lights. "Can I sit?" Russell gestured to the floor 8 feet away. "I won't come closer unless you want." Heather considered, nodded slightly. Russell slid down the wall cross-legged, giving her space and time. They sat in silence. This was something he'd learned with Caleb. Sometimes the best offering was presence without demand. No questions, no expectations, no performance required. Heather pulled out the stegosaurus, held it up, studying it in the dimmer light. "Stegosaurus stenops," Russell said conversationally. "Late Jurassic period. My son says they're best because of the thagomizer, the spiky tail. If you're a herbivore, you need good defense." Heather's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "He's 8. His name is Caleb. He's got about 200 dinosaur figures at home. Can tell you the scientific name of every one. He arranges them by time period every morning. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Has to be in the right order, or the day feels wrong." Heather watched him. Really watched, her hands stilled. "The thing about people like Caleb," Russell said carefully, "is they see patterns others miss. They notice when something's off, when the rhythm's wrong. It's not a problem, just a different way of understanding the world. Sometimes his way makes more sense." "My mom doesn't understand," Heather said suddenly, voice small but clear. First full sentence. Russell didn't react too strongly, just accepted it as normal, which it was. Understanding takes time, even for parents. She's always busy. Important meetings, important calls. "I'm supposed to be quiet and good, and not make problems." Russell's chest tightened. "You're not a problem. You're a person. Any adult who makes you feel invisible to be acceptable is wrong, including your mom, if that's what she's doing." Heather looked up, something like hope in her eyes. "Really? Really?" They sat quietly. Then Heather stood, smoothed her dress, walked toward the door. She stopped next to Russell, close enough to see faint freckles across her nose. "Thank you," she said again. Same words from the gala, but this time without audience, without pressure, just because she meant them. "Anytime," Russell said. "If you need a quiet place and I'm around, find me. Okay?" No questions asked. Heather nodded, then disappeared into the corridor, Stegosaurus clutched tight. Russell sat on that office floor 5 more minutes, processing. He'd crossed the line again, inserted himself where it wasn't technically his business, but he'd stopped caring about professional the day he traded his credentials for a mop. Sometimes the right thing and the professional thing weren't the same. After that, it became routine. Every few days, Russell worked the executive floor, and Heather found him. Sometimes, she just wanted to sit in the same space while he cleaned, working on homework or drawing. Sometimes, she wanted to talk about dinosaurs, or sensory techniques, or nothing at all. Russell never pushed, just existed as steady presence, someone who saw her without requiring her to be anything other than exactly who she was. He learned things gradually. Heather was 10, liked mathematics more than reading, could identify classical composers by the first 8 notes. Her parents divorced when she was 6. Messy, bitter, custody battles that treated her like property. Her father remarried, started a new family without complications, saw Heather every other weekend, spent that time trying to correct her behaviors. Her mother worked 70-hour weeks, brought home stress like groceries. She cries sometimes, Heather told him one evening, sitting on the floor while Russell replaced a water cooler. Late at night when she thinks I'm asleep, she sits in her office and cries. Russell's hand stilled. That must be hard to hear. I want to help, but I don't know how. I make things worse. That's what my dad says. Your dad is wrong. Russell set down the water bottle, turned to face her fully. You're not responsible for your parents' problems, not your mom's stress, not your dad's discomfort. That's their stuff, not yours. But if I were different, if you were different, you wouldn't be you. And you are exactly who you're supposed to be. Heather looked at him long, then returned to her drawing, intricate geometric patterns repeating with mathematical precision. 2 months passed like this. Russell and Heather's quiet friendship existing in margins where no one paid attention to the janitor or the executive's difficult daughter. Russell's life found new rhythm. Work, Caleb, occasional encounters with Heather, repeat. Not the life he'd planned, but it had steadiness, simplicity that felt like healing, even unnamed. Then came the night everything changed. Nearly midnight, Russell finishing his shift. When he heard raised voices from Adrienne's corner office, he almost didn't investigate, had learned about eavesdropping, but then heard Heather's voice, high and distressed, and instinct overrode caution. He rounded the corner. Heather in the hallway outside her mother's office, stimming hard, hands flapping. Through glass walls, Russell saw Adrienne on the phone, face tight with stress, gesturing sharply. A man in an expensive suit sat across from her, corporate smile, decision-maker aura. She won't stop, Heather said when she saw Russell. The meeting won't stop. It's been 3 hours. She promised we'd go home at 9. It was 12:15. Okay, Russell said calmly. Let's go to the break room. No one's there this late. He led Heather down the hall to the small executive kitchenette, dark and quiet. Just vending machine hum and distant HVAC. Heather immediately went to the corner, made herself small. Russell pulled out his phone. I'm going to show you something my son does when he needs to wait for something difficult. He opened photos, found the time-lapse video of Caleb arranging dinosaurs. Watch. This took 45 minutes real time, but I sped it up. See how he's not rushing? Taking his time, making it perfect. Because waiting isn't wasted time. It's part of the process. Heather watched, breathing gradually slowing. When it ended, can I see it again? Russell played it 3 more times. By the 4th viewing, Heather had pulled out her stegosaurus, arranging it on the floor, rearranging, finding the pattern that felt right. My mom doesn't like when I do this, she said quietly. She says I need to be more flexible. That's what her therapists say to teach me, flexibility. Russell sat down across from her, keeping distance. Flexibility is good, but so is having rituals that make you feel safe. The trick is knowing when you need which one. How do you know? Practice. Mistakes. More practice. Nobody gets it right all the time. Silence. Then, do you think my mom wishes I was different? The question landed like a physical blow. Russell thought carefully. I think your mom is carrying a lot of weight, trying to be perfect at everything. Perfect CEO, perfect mother, perfect image. And that's impossible, and it's crushing her. But none of that is about you being wrong. It's about her not knowing how to let herself be human. You sound like a therapist. Russell laughed, surprised. I used to be one. Before I became a janitor. Why did you change? Because I forgot the most important lesson I used to teach, that being present matters more than being perfect. I learned that the hard way. Heather studied him with that too aware gaze. Because of Caleb's mom? Russell felt his throat tighten. He'd never mentioned Teresa directly, but Heather was perceptive the way kids with autism often were, seeing through social niceties to truth underneath. Yeah, because of Caleb's mom. Is she dead? Most adults would dance around the question. Heather just asked. Russell appreciated that. Yes, car accident, 3 years ago. That's sad. It is. Do you miss her? Every day. Heather nodded, accepting. Then, I miss my dad. The dad he used to be, before I was diagnosed. He used to play with me. Now he just tries to fix me. Russell didn't have words, so he just stayed there, sitting on the break room floor with a 10-year-old who deserved better, and let silence hold them both. At 12:45, Adrienne appeared in the doorway. Exhausted, composure cracked. When she saw Russell and Heather on the floor, something complicated crossed her face. Heather, sweetie, I'm so sorry. The meeting ran. She stopped, looked at Russell. What are you doing here? She was waiting for you, Russell said simply, standing. I kept her company. Adrienne's eyes moved between them. Russell could see her calculating. About propriety, boundaries, what this looked like. Then she seemed to deflate. Thank you, she said, and this time sounded like she meant it. Thank you. Russell nodded. Heather stood, walked to her mother. Took her hand. Adrienne looked down at their joined hands like she'd forgotten what that felt like. You should go home, Russell said quietly. The work will still be there tomorrow. The work is always there tomorrow. That's the problem. Then make a different choice. Too bold, too familiar, definitely crossing the line. But Russell was done pretending invisible walls mattered more than visible pain. Adrienne looked at him. Really looked. Who are you? She asked. Really? Someone who used to know better and is trying to learn again. Russell picked up his cart. Good night, Ms. Adrienne. Heather. He left them in the doorway, mother and daughter, both looking lost. The next week passed quietly. Russell worked, saw Heather twice. Once she waved from down a hallway. Once they talked 10 minutes about Triceratops defense mechanisms. Things felt normal, whatever passed for normal. Then came the email. Russell rarely checked work email. Custodial staff got shift schedules and policy updates. But something made him open the portal Tuesday morning. There it was. Message from Adrienne Whitmore's assistant, requesting a meeting at 2 p.m. Russell's first thought was firing. He'd overstepped too many times. Corporate was cutting ties. He should feel relieved. Instead, he felt protective anger on Heather's behalf. Whatever happened to him didn't matter. But that little girl needed someone who saw her as more than inconvenience. He showed up at 1:55, still in his uniform. Adrienne's assistant showed him in without comment. Adrienne sat behind her desk, looking uncertain for the first time since he'd met her. Not the ice queen from the gala, not the stressed executive, just a woman who seemed profoundly tired. Please sit, she said. Russell sat, waiting. Adrienne opened a folder, studied it, looked up. Dr. Russell Hayes, PhD in clinical psychology from Cornell, specialized in family systems therapy, autism spectrum disorders, practiced 8 years, published 4 papers on neurodevelopmental parenting approaches, gave a TEDx talk in 2015 about reframing disability as difference. She closed the folder. You left your practice 3 years ago, took a custodial position. No explanation on file. Russell kept his expression neutral. You've been researching me. After last week, I got curious. It's not every day a janitor tells me to make different choices like he actually understood what those choices were. She leaned back. Your wife, Teresa Hayes, also a therapist, died in a car accident. She was rushing home because your son was having a crisis at school. That's not public information. No, but I have resources. Adrienne's voice softened. I'm not invading your privacy, Dr. Hayes. I'm trying to understand why someone with your credentials is cleaning my floors. Because I couldn't save my wife, couldn't help my son when he needed me, certainly couldn't help anyone else when I couldn't help my own family. The words came harder than intended. So I found work that let me be present. That's all. That's the whole story. Adrienne was quiet. Then, I used to be a teacher, special education. I loved it. I was good at it. Then I married a man who convinced me that wasn't enough, that I needed to be more, achieve more, prove more. So I went to business school, built a company, became exactly what he wanted. And then we had Heather. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the city. The diagnosis came when she was 4. My husband said I needed the best therapists, most prestigious programs, whatever it took to fix her. But nothing worked the way he wanted. She was still autistic, still different, still his daughter who didn't fit his cultivated image. Adrienne's reflection looked ghostly. The divorce was brutal. He argued I was an unfit mother because I worked too much. I argued he was unfit because he couldn't accept his daughter as she was. We were both right. Russell stayed quiet, letting her talk. I won custody, built the company bigger, proved I could do both, be CEO and mother, except I'm failing spectacularly at the second part. She turned back. My daughter talks to you, seeks you out. In 10 minutes, you can calm her in ways I haven't been able to in years. And I realized something. I've been so focused on proving I'm enough that I forgot to just be present. Just like you said. Ms. Whitmore, I want to hire you as a consultant. Part-time, whatever hours work for your son's schedule. Help me build programs for neurodiverse employees. Advise on creating genuinely inclusive policies, not performative diversity initiatives my board loves. And, she hesitated, help me figure out how to be the mother Heather deserves, not as her therapist. She has enough of those. But as someone who understands. Russell sat back, stunned. I don't have a practice anymore. I let my license lapse. You don't need a license to consult on workplace inclusion. And if you want to pursue relicensure later, the company will fund it. Adrienne returned to her desk. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not anymore. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. Someone who figured out presence matters more than perfection. Someone my daughter trusts. This crosses about 15 different boundaries. Probably. But I've spent 10 years respecting boundaries, and it's gotten me a company I'm too exhausted to enjoy, and a daughter who finds more comfort with the janitor than her own mother. Adrienne's voice cracked slightly. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for real. Russell thought about Caleb, about routines they'd built, about the small, manageable life. He thought about Teresa, about families he'd counseled before the accident, about the vocation he'd loved and abandoned. And he thought about Heather, sitting in corners at galas, waiting in hallways past midnight, carrying a plastic stegosaurus like a talisman against a world with no space for her. I keep the custodial position, he said finally. Part-time, reduced hours. But I keep it. Adrienne looked puzzled. Why? Because it keeps me grounded. Because my son needs predictability. And because there's no shame in the work. It's honest, useful, and it reminds me that no job is beneath anyone. Russell met her eyes. If we're building something real, it starts with that understanding. That every person in this building, executives to cleaning crew, has value. Not because of title, but because they're human. Adrienne smiled. Real. The first Russell had seen. Deal. When can you start? When's your next company event? Her smile faded. Friday. Major investor gala. Black tie. I'm expected to give a speech about company culture and innovation. Heather is supposed to appear briefly for the photo opportunity. The way she said photo opportunity dripped with self-loathing. Bring her, but create space for her. Sensory-friendly quiet room. Headphones if she needs them. Don't make her perform. Let her be there on her terms or not at all. The board will have opinions. The board isn't her parent. Adrienne studied him, then nodded. Okay, we'll try it your way. Friday arrived heavy with ceremony. Russell worked the day shift, setting up a small room off the main ballroom. Dimmed lights, soft chairs, noise-canceling headphones. Fidget tools Caleb had helped him choose. Mrs. Patterson agreed to bring Caleb later, after the formal program, so his son could meet Heather properly. The gala unfolded like these things always did. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes, saying beautiful things about beautiful intentions. Russell watched from margins, technically working, but mostly observing. Adrienne gave her speech, polished and professional, about innovation and inclusion. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. Heather appeared briefly, wearing that midnight blue dress. She stood next to her mother for exactly 3 photos, then retreated to Russell's quiet room. He saw Adrienne's face, the moment of wanting to call her back, make her stay, perform just a little longer. But then she saw Russell watching, and she let Heather go. An hour later, Russell was refilling ice buckets when Heather found him, but this time she wasn't alone. She'd brought another girl, maybe 12 or 13, also dressed formally, also looking overwhelmed. "This is Sabrina," Heather said. "She's the daughter of one of the investors. She was hiding in the bathroom. I told her about the quiet room." Russell looked at Sabrina, saw the same hunted expression Heather had worn at their first meeting. "Would you like to see it?" he asked gently. Sabrina nodded, not quite making eye contact. Russell led both girls to the quiet room. Within 10 minutes, 3 more young people found their way there. Guests' children dragged to an adult event, drowning in sensory overload. Russell stayed nearby, not hovering but available, watching as the kids gradually relaxed. That's when it happened. The orchestra struck up a waltz, music floating through the open doorway. Heather stood, walked to the threshold, looked out at the ballroom where couples were beginning to dance. Russell saw something shift in her expression. Longing, maybe, or curiosity. She turned back to him, and before he could process what was happening, she walked across the quiet room and held out her hand. "Dance with me," she said. Not a question. An invitation. A request from a girl who'd spent her life being told to be smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. Now she was asking for space, asking to be seen, asking to take up room in the world. Russell looked at that small, outstretched hand. He thought about all the lines he'd crossed, all the boundaries he'd blurred, all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about what he'd told Adrienne. Presence matters more than perfection. He took Heather's hand. "Okay." They walked together out of the quiet room into the ballroom. The lights were bright, the music was loud, and every eye in the room was about to turn toward them. Russell could feel his heart hammering. This wasn't a shadowy corridor or empty conference room. This was public. This was a statement. Heather didn't hesitate. She led him to an open space on the dance floor, turned to face him, placed her small hand in his rough, calloused one. The other hand went to his shoulder, mirroring the formal position she must have seen 100 times without ever being invited to participate. The music swelled. Russell put his free hand on her shoulder blade, giving her control, letting her set the pace. They began to move. Not a perfect waltz, not practiced performance, just a shuffle step vaguely matching rhythm, a simple back and forth, more about presence than precision. Every single person in that ballroom stopped talking. Russell saw them staring. Executives, investors, beautiful people in beautiful clothes. He saw shock, confusion, judgment. He saw hands reaching for phones to capture this moment, this scandal of a janitor dancing with the CEO's daughter at a black tie gala. He saw board members looking at Adrienne, waiting for her to intervene, to stop this breach of propriety. Then he saw Adrienne herself, standing at the edge of the dance floor. She wasn't moving to stop them. She was just watching, hand pressed to her mouth, and Russell realized she was crying. Not with embarrassment or anger, but with something else entirely. Recognition, maybe, or relief. The song played on. Heather's hand tightened in Russell's. He looked down to see her face, not anxious, not overwhelmed, peaceful. She was swaying with the music, eyes half closed, completely present. Russell felt something crack open in his chest. This was why he'd become a therapist. Not to fix people or change them or make them acceptable to a world demanding conformity, but to create space for them to be fully themselves, exactly as they were, without apology or performance. The waltz ended. The ballroom was dead silent. Russell and Heather stood there, still holding hands, as the weight of 200 stares pressed down like physical force. Then Adrienne began to clap. Slow, deliberate applause echoing in silence. She walked onto the dance floor, moving through the crowd that parted automatically. When she reached them, she didn't pull Heather away. Instead, she held out her hand to Russell. "May I cut in?" she asked quietly. Russell stepped back, releasing Heather. Then Adrienne did something that made half the room audibly gasp. She kicked off her designer heels, got down on her knees so she was at her daughter's height, and held out both hands. "Will you dance with me too?" she asked. "Please." Heather looked at her mother. Really looked, maybe for the first time in years, seeing past the CEO and the perfection and the constant stress to the person underneath. The teacher who used to understand, the mother trying to find her way back. Heather took her mother's hands. The orchestra, reading the moment with professional grace, struck up another waltz. Adrienne and Heather began to move, awkward and unrehearsed, the CEO in her $10,000 gown dancing barefoot with her daughter in the middle of the ballroom floor. Not performing for cameras, not caring about optics or board opinions, just present, just real, just enough. Russell backed away slowly, letting them have this moment. He returned to his card in the service corridor, but he could still see them through the doorway. Mother and daughter, dancing like nobody was watching, even though everybody was. Someone cleared their throat behind him. Russell turned to find Mr. Pemberton, the silver-haired board member from the first gala, looking at him with an unreadable expression. "That was quite a spectacle," Pemberton said. Russell braced for confrontation. "Yes, sir." "You know what's remarkable? In 30 years attending these galas, I've never seen anyone look genuinely happy. It's all performance, all networking, all image management." He turned to Russell. "But that little girl, dancing with you, dancing with her mother, that was real joy. First time I've seen the actual point of these charity events reflected in the attendees." He walked away before Russell could respond, leaving him standing with his mop and cleaning cart, trying to process what had just happened. The gala eventually wound down. Guests departed with expensive gift bags and carefully cultivated connections. The ballroom slowly emptied until it was just Russell and other custodial staff, cleaning up detritus of another successful event. He was collecting abandoned champagne flutes when Adrienne appeared, still barefoot, carrying her shoes in one hand and Heather's hand in the other. "Russell," she said, voice different now, softer, more open. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing her. For seeing me." "You did the hard part," Russell said. "You chose to be present instead of perfect. It terrified me, every second. But also," she looked down at Heather, who was leaning against her mother's side, exhausted but content. "It felt right, for the first time in a long time." Mrs. Patterson appeared then, Caleb in tow. Russell's son spotted him immediately, made a beeline across the ballroom, not running, but moving with that determined purpose Russell knew so well. Caleb stopped short and held up a plastic brachiosaurus. "For Heather," Caleb said, words coming out careful and practiced. "Because her stegosaurus probably needs a friend." Heather's eyes went wide. She looked at Caleb, then at the brachiosaurus, then at Russell, as if asking permission. Russell nodded. She took the dinosaur gently, cradling it like precious treasure. "Thank you." Then, to Caleb, "Do you want to see my pattern drawings?" Caleb's face lit up in that rare, genuine smile Russell lived for. "Yes." The two kids moved to a nearby table, pulling out papers and dinosaurs, settling into that comfortable parallel play. Neurotypical adults often mistook for isolation, but which was actually its own form of perfect connection. Adrienne and Russell stood watching their children, two single parents, who'd both been drowning in different ways, both trying to be everything and losing themselves in the process. "I meant what I said about the consulting position," Adrienne said, "if you're still interested. I want to do this right. Not just for Heather, but for everyone in the company who's been made to feel like they need to hide parts of themselves to be acceptable." Russell watched Caleb and Heather, heads bent together over their drawings. "I'm interested, but we do it carefully. Proper boundaries, clear roles, transparency with your board. No more midnight break room sessions or ambiguous relationships. Agreed, professional, structured, and still real." "And still real," Russell echoed. 6 months later, the Whitmore building hosted another gala. This one looked different. Crystal and champagne and people in expensive clothes remained, but now there was also a sensory-friendly wing with multiple quiet rooms, staffed by trained volunteers. Visual schedules posted throughout, dietary restriction labels on every food station, a policy clearly stating anyone could come and go as needed, without social penalty. Russell stood near the entrance, not as custodial staff but as Director of Inclusion Initiatives, fancy title for someone who spent his days helping the company live up to its diversity rhetoric. He still kept his part-time custodial position, still cleaned floors twice a week because that work grounded him. Adrienne had stopped questioning it, started seeing it for what it was, a reminder that value didn't come from titles. Caleb and Heather were at the kids' table, surrounded by half a dozen other children of various neurotypes, all engaged in what looked like an intense debate about whether pterodactyls counted as dinosaurs. Russell watched his son hold his own in the conversation, watched him not just be tolerated, but genuinely included. Adrienne appeared at his elbow, wearing a simple dress instead of armor-like gowns she used to favor. Her hair was down. She looked younger, less burdened. "Christopher told me we've had 3 other companies reach out asking about our inclusion program. They want to know how we built it." "What did you tell them?" "That it started with a janitor who refused to ignore a little girl everyone else had written off. That it required someone willing to see past performance to humanity underneath. and that the only thing really required is choosing to give a damn. Russell smiled. That's a pretty good summary. It's the truth. Adrian's gaze drifted back to Heather. She asked me something yesterday. She asked if I liked my job more now than before. What did you say? I said I liked myself more now than before, and that made all the difference. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the gala unfold. It wasn't perfect. A child had a meltdown near the buffet. One executive made an awkward comment about special needs. A few guests still looked uncomfortable with accommodations that disrupted their expectations. But it was real. Messy and imperfect, and gloriously, stubbornly real. The orchestra began a waltz. Russell saw Heather's head come up, tracking the music. She excused herself from the kids' table and walked across the ballroom, not to Russell, but to her mother. She held out her hand. "Dance with me?" Heather asked. Adrienne took her daughter's hand without hesitation. Without checking who was watching or what they'd think, they moved onto the dance floor together, and this time, when they began to sway, they were joined by others. Not just polished couples who knew all the right steps, but families with children, elderly guests who'd been sitting alone, even Mr. Pemberton dancing with his granddaughter, who nobody had realized was autistic until the company's new inclusion initiatives had given her family language for what they'd been navigating alone. Caleb appeared at Russell's side, watching the dancing with analytical interest. "Is that what they mean by community?" he asked. Russell thought about it, thought about how far they'd come from that first night when Heather had been invisible in a room full of people, when he'd been invisible in a different way, when both of them had been drowning in the gap between what they were and what the world demanded they pretend to be. "Yeah, buddy," Russell said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. "I think that's exactly what they mean." Caleb leaned into the embrace, solid and warm and real. On the dance floor, Heather caught Russell's eye and waved, her stegosaurus peeking out of her dress pocket like always. Adrienne waved too, her expression open and grateful, and still a little surprised that this was her life now. The music played on, the lights blazed overhead, but this time they illuminated something worth seeing. Not perfection, not performance, but people choosing presence over pretense, choosing to show up fully as themselves and making space for others to do the same. Russell had spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to make himself small enough that he wouldn't hurt anyone else through his inadequacy. But standing here now, watching his son confidently exist in a world that had learned to make room for him, watching Heather dance with her mother in a space they'd claimed together, he realized that the opposite of invisible wasn't perfect. It was present. Caleb tugged on Russell's sleeve. "Can we dance too?" Russell looked down at his son, at the hope and trust in that face. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can dance too." They moved onto the floor together, father and son, joining the messy, beautiful, imperfect gathering of humans who'd figured out that the only thing worth performing was authenticity. The crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting golden light across marble floors, and for the first time in 3 years, Russell didn't feel like a shadow passing through someone else's spotlight. He felt seen. He felt present. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and that, in the end, was worth more than any amount of perfection could ever buy.